Dalton Miller of the Pro Football Network. Dalton, how are you, my friend? Really appreciate you staying up late with us here tonight. And hopefully you've gotten to catch up on a little bit of rest after working your buns off over the course of the draft.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Thanks for having me. I missed your beautiful faces. I see them on Twitch, obviously, but it feels different when I'm actually, looking at your faces and talking to you at the same time. I'm also watching Dallas Phoenix, and it's been a little bit upsetting of a game so far. But when we look back, the draft, it was fun. I am excited for next year. It sounds like I'm going to do
next
a little
year.
Bit more, yeah, it sounds like I'm going to do a little bit more draft-centric stuff because this year I was doing draft stuff, but it was draft stuff with like an NFL focus instead. So I didn't really get to dive into the nitty-gritty, and it feels like, or it sounds like we're going to combine the NFL and the draft department after the season ends next year. And so I'm going to actually get into more evaluation on the site again next year. So I'm excited for that.
Okay, that is very, very exciting. So looking back and reflecting before we preview next year's draft,
right?
Let's put a bow on this year's draft. Did you like what the Cowboys did? I was just talking with KG. To me, and I don't dislike it. I've come around. I didn't hate the Tyler Smith pick, especially with the way the draft unfolded in round one. I'm never against taking an offensive lineman. And all the guys that I loved, specifically Kenyon Green, I know you loved Zion Johnson, but both were well gone by the time the Cowboys were on the clock. So to take Tyler Smith there, I didn't hate it. I thought maybe there were some better defensive players on the board, but they wanted to go offensive line. We knew that. I loved what they did on day 3. What did you think about the Cowboys class?
Yeah, and it was funny. We had like a 105.3 The Fan reunion of guys who no longer work there on Thursday with me, Jeffrey Kavanaugh, and KT Fun
I saw that. How amazing.
Yes, and obviously when the Tyler Smith pick happened, we made a big deal out of it and kind of sold it. We Hollywooded it a little bit.
Well, I know Jeff probably hated it because it wasn't a wide receiver.
Well, absolutely. He definitely wanted a wide receiver. I knew it was going to happen. I had been texted that morning and was told that if it was a wiped out board, which it kind of seemed as the April went on that might end up happening. I thought for sure there's going to be a couple of great players there at 24. And then as things started to progress, it just kind of felt like that wasn't going to happen. I was told that morning that they were going to pick Tyler Smith, and then they did end up picking Tyler Smith later that evening. And so I wasn't super, caught off guard by it. But when I looked at it, and I went back and I watched him on Twitch the next day with some people that really wanted to see him again, and it's tough because he is all upside at this point. His hand placement is horrific in pass protection, and some of this stuff will go away a little bit with the move to the interior. He won't have to work in space quite as often, but there are a lot of things to be excited about. He has great raw natural power in his hands, and his lower body is very powerful. But the thing that really stuck out to me was whenever they got him on the move at Tulsa, he was such a fluid athlete. His footwork was so natural, getting in and out of like karaoke steps or shuffles. And so I'm excited for the upside there, but he's got to get with the right private coaching to get that development because it will not happen with Joe Philbin.
Oh, bold Joe Philbin there. Look, it's amazing to me, Dalton, because, and I'm glad you brought that up because, it felt like after the season was over with, a lot of us wanted that dude gone. The way that the offensive line broke down in the second half of the season, obviously they couldn't run the football. You got to do with a torn PCL running around, with the football, that kind of thing. But why should I, if I'm going to play, the positive side of this, why should I trust Joe Philbin to get the most in this offensive line staff, to get the most out of Tyler Smith, knowing how I felt about him if I felt that way about Joe Philbin at the end of last season?
I don't think you can. When you look at the offensive linemen that have been developed around Dallas recently, it's all been rounded around Duke Manyweather, who is a private offensive line coach, Tyler Steele, Linderbaum. There's guys who are getting better, and Linderbaum just kind of got better on his own last year. But Steele is somebody who worked with Duke and gotten very much better with Duke. And I don't know if that would have happened if it would have been just for Joe Philbin. Listen, it's not all Joe Philbin's fault. With the current CBA in place, there is not a lot of practice time. And that has hurt quarterbacks the most, those pocket passers particularly. But it hurts everybody else too, because they don't get the time on task in practice to really improve and work on technique, because it's a lot of install and a lot of movement in what you're going to do in your plays. So I am more worried about who he gets with off the field and the work that he's putting in. The thing that you can be excited about is he seemed like somebody who is very motivated to get better. He seemed like the type that is going to be in the weight room every single day and working hard when he spoke, and you really like to see that. Now, for the rest of the draft, I mean, I thought they did pretty well. The Sam Williams pick is one that I'm not super excited about, just because whenever there's background like his, with obviously the sexual assault rape charge that ended up being dropped just in the United States, many of those cases are never prosecuted and are often dropped because there's a lack of physical evidence in most of those cases. So it's tough to just ignore that entirely. But when we're talking about the player, there's a ton of upside. He's not like the super bendy athlete that Randy Gregory was, but he's super explosive. He can move in and out. He can cut and get around offensive linemen. He can work inside and outside. And he is a strong run defender as well. So you're excited about that. And then they killed it after that. Well, Let's Go was a bit of an upside pick. He's just kind of an athlete out of North Dakota at this point. But Jalen Tolbert was fantastic value. He's a guy in mock drafts at 56. It was like, all right, well, like maybe, but there was always somebody better around at 56. And then when 56 came around, it wasn't like that. But he was never around at 88 in mock drafts. So I felt like that was really good value. He's a guy that can play inside and out, and I think he really frees up CeeDee Lamb to do whatever he kind of wants. And then once Michael Gallup gets back into the fold and healthy, he will be the outside guy. He will be the X receiver. But I like that little trio that you have there because I think they all complement each other well. Ferguson probably won't be ready year one. He'll be the tight end 2, obviously, behind Schultz. But you hope that tight ends can develop. And I say that because it's very difficult to develop at the tight end position. You see these guys, recently especially, it's been a lot of athletes that they just kind of bet on that they can teach, because a lot of these guys that you take, you think that they're pro ready, like Dalton Schultz in year 1, year 2. You thought he was going to come out of Stanford and be a good blocker because that's what he was good at Stanford. And then it turns out he's kind of a sudden athlete and he's a good route runner, but he's not physical enough to be in line and block down in and down out. So I think when you look at that, you hope Ferguson can be that type of player in the future, but I don't expect it right away. Obviously, you're not going to get Javon Clark at all. I like Clark, but it doesn't seem like you're going to get him. And then Ridgeway was a fantastic pick.
You got Dalton Miller with us here on 105 through the Fan via the Diamond Factory hotline. So the rest of the division, the Eagles seem like they crushed it. The Giants seem like they did as well. Washington with Jahan Dodson in the first round. They got a couple other nice parts. I mean, what did you think of the way the NFCs came out with the draft classes they put together?
Philly might be, from top to bottom, the best roster in the division. But
I agree. I said the same thing last night. Eric was kind of like, I got to look at it. I'm like, Look, man, outside of quarterback, I think they are the best team in the East.
That defensive line is disgusting. It really, truly is. They have 3 ridiculous defensive tackles, and they picked up Hassan Reddick in free agency, and Josh Sweat is a good player. So that is going to be a tough defensive line to deal with. And they're a really good football team outside of Jalen Hurts. And if Jalen Hurts progresses, you have a real fight for the division. It was really tough for the New York Giants to screw this up because they had arguably the 2 top players in the entire draft class fall to them at 5 and 7 in Kayvon Thibodeau and Evan Neal. After that, things got a little bit weird for them. But those first 2 picks could be enough to change the franchise for the next couple of years. And then Washington, Jahan Dotson that early felt a little bit weird, but I'd already talked about this before. He is one of the most well-spoken individuals I've ever met. Not just well-spoken, but he was incredibly personable with everything that he said when I interviewed him at Penn State. So he's somebody that I root for but don't want to because it's Washington, obviously. And then they picked Sam Howell in round 5, and I thought that was outrageous value for a player of his abilities. And it'll be interesting to see because they had to call Carson Wentz to tell him that they were taking a fifth-round quarterback. And I think if you have to tell your franchise quarterback that, you don't have a franchise quarterback.
Pretty fragile mentally, right? That's pretty bad.
And what just happened in the Mavs in the 5 minutes I've been talking, guys? What is this
Chris
run?
Paul happened. It's the Chris Paul takeover again. He literally has not missed a shot in the fourth quarter. He's got 14 of the 19 points, or now the 14 of the 21 points,
Dalton,
or whatever.
I just looked over at KG during this, and I said, during this run, I mean, why does Jason Kidd not take a timeout to just slow this down?
Yeah, I don't know, but
I don't know.
I did want to ask you, Dalton, specifically with that, especially with the Giants, because I've told people this entire offseason, the one team that concerns me the most in the NFC East is the Giants, because they've got a measure of competence now in that organization, with Brian Dable taking over as head coach, Joe Sheehan taking over as general manager there, both of them coming from Buffalo. The only question I have is, can Dable get out of Daniel Jones what they think is capable of him as a quarterback? Do you think that he's capable of that, given what he was able to do with the work that he did with Josh Allen out in Buffalo?
It'll be interesting to see how Jones is able to develop. I feel bad for Daniel Jones, and I was never high on him coming out of Duke. And when you look at him, he's had some pretty high highs. Like, he's shown flashes of being a franchise quarterback. Obviously, the turnovers have always been an issue for him, and it's not as much the interceptions as it is the fumbles and the pocket management. If that offensive line improves, it's a competent wide receiver core overall. I mean, I know that Galladay didn't have a big year last year, but I think Daniel Jones, if he's able to have a little bit of time, he can hit those intermediate passes to Galladay, and they can have a little bit of fun. And then obviously you have Saquon Barkley, who, might not be able to stay healthy, but is a freak physical talent. And that defense is pretty talented as well overall. Now, obviously, linebacker is a little bit of a sore spot, and it looks like they're going to cut James Bradbury. They've been trying to get a deal done in a trade with him. He wants a big extension, and I think they're just trying to get any value they can out of him. But I think they're going to end up just cutting their losses and saving a little bit of money against the cap. So it'll be interesting to see how that happens. Jones, I don't see it in a year, with them still having some issues on the offensive line. I don't know how well that offense is going to mesh in year one. And it would take a monstrous season from DJ to get a long-term extension in New York. I think he's going to be looking for another job next year somewhere.